going, boy!
Hey everybody out there, this is Balefire. This video is a direct response to a recent video posted by Star Wars Theory, a channel I subscribe to and greatly respect. He brought up some interesting points about the Star Wars prequels that have honestly got me thinking. Even after all these years of pondering the prequel trilogy and my own mixed feelings about it, I've been mulling over this generational divide in the Star Wars fandom for a long time. But Star Wars Theory presented some reasoning that I found both impressive and intriguing. It got me wanting to dig a little deeper into why these generational differences exist and what it really says about our relationship to Star Wars. In his video, Star Wars Theory talks about how the prequels were made for the younger generation, and how, as those fans got older, they developed a deeper appreciation for the story of Anakin and Obi-Wan. Now, as he puts it, Anakin and Obi-Wan are the thing, whereas back in the day they were largely ignored. He even questions whether the sequels could age as well as the prequels have. He doubts it, and I tend to agree with him. Today I want to respond to those points, because they highlight some fascinating aspects of what it means to be a Star Wars fan from different generations. So let's go back to 1999, when The Phantom Menace first hit theaters. For someone like me, who grew up with the original trilogy, there were big expectations. I grew up with A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Return of the Jedi, and these movies set a high bar for storytelling, world building, and practical effects. In my mind, the prequels were going to continue that legacy and maybe even mature with us as fans. I was ready for a more darker, more complex story that would fit in with the epic saga that we'd come to know, that I could appreciate as an adult. What we got, as Star Wars Theory points out, was a trilogy that felt like it was made for a younger generation again, with Jar Jar Binks, the bright CGI landscapes, that unmistakable shininess of modern CGI movies. Felt more like a step backward rather than the darker, more grounded step forward that many of us expected. For someone like me, whose first Star Wars memories were listening to the radio dramatizations on CBC on long road trips with my dad, or seeing The Empire Strikes Back at the drive-in when I was 5 years old, this shift in character from the originals to the prequels was hard to reconcile. When I watched The Phantom Menace, I was 24 years old. Star Wars was more than just a sci-fi story. It was a deep, grounded saga, practically carved in stone. I'd spent 20 years building up this mythology in my head, imagining the past of these characters, envisioning their stories that could take us further into this gritty and tactile universe. Part of what made the original trilogy so unique and memorable was that no one had ever seen anything like it before. There was no other entity in film that could compare to the groundbreaking effects and storytelling Star Wars brought to us. The practical effects, the models, the simple techniques, they were pioneering. George Lucas literally invented the first special effects company in ILM. And they made Star Wars feel real and tangible. To see that replaced with CGI, and in an era where CGI was just getting a good foothold, and in a story that felt more lighthearted and childlike than we were expecting, it felt jarring. I mean, how can a CGI Yoda look like a cartoon while the puppet they used decades before looked legit? If practical special effects had been a part of the mandate when producing the prequels, only using CGI when absolutely necessary, I think the landing would have been a lot smoother for the original fans. And I also think it's one of the big reasons why it's been so tough for fans of my generation, those of us born in the 60s or 70s, to get into the prequels, even years later. The tonal difference was undeniable, as Star Wars Theory puts forward in his video, and the expectations we'd built up over the decades made it all the more striking. But here's where Star Wars Theory made a point that really clicked for me. He was 9 years old when The Phantom Menace came out, so for him, that was his foundational Star Wars experience. As he mentions, his generation embraced the prequels in a way that my generation struggled to do. I think that perspective really highlights how Star Wars has this unique ability to shape itself to the age and mindset of the fans who first experience it in their time. For Star Wars Theory and a whole generation of fans, the Star Wars prequels were exciting, groundbreaking, emotionally engaging, and their first doorway into this universe. They didn't have to compare them to the original trilogy, because they were the original trilogy. It's episodes 1, 2, and 3. This is the first glimpse into a galaxy far, far away. For me, though, it was different. I'd already spent years with Luke, Leia, and Han with the practical effects and the grittier style of the originals. So when I saw the prequels, I couldn't help but see them as lacking some of that magic. Even now, I still feel the original trilogy has a depth and authenticity that the prequels will never match. And another point that Star Wars Theory brings up is that the prequels aged over time nicely. I think he's kind of right. As younger fans grew up, they found new layers in Anakin's story, especially as they gained more life experience and came to understand the tragedy of his journey. And that's a powerful thing. Watching The Revenge of the Sith with the hindsight of knowing what Anakin becomes gives the prequels a tragic depth. But even with that depth, I still find myself holding the originals closer to my heart. When it comes to effects, there's no denying the shift from practical effects to CGI in the prequels. The originals were tactile, gritty, and had a grounded realism that I've always appreciated. In the prequels, the CGI felt too polished, almost artificial. To his credit, Star Wars Theory acknowledges this tonal and stylistic difference too. And he seems to appreciate both styles, which I still find myself, after all these years, yearning for that grounded feel of the originals. Another thing that struck me with Star Wars Theory's video was his question about whether the sequels might age as well as the prequels have. He doesn't think so, and honestly, neither do I. The prequels, for all their differences, were still Lucas's vision. They connected with the originals in a way that kept the story's continuity alive. The sequels, though, it felt like a different story altogether, more of a corporate creation than a visionary continuation. So while the prequels have found a special place in the hearts of younger fans, I'm not sure the sequels will ever achieve the same kind of redemption. Ultimately, Star Wars Theory and I are coming from two very different eras of Star Wars, and it's clear that where you start shapes how you feel about the entire saga. Star Wars Theory started with the prequels, and that was his foundation. For me, it was the originals. And to this day, I still see them as the peak of Star Wars. If I had to rank all three trilogies in order of quality and enjoyment, they would be from 1 to 9 like this. The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, A New Hope, The Force Awakens, The Revenge of the Sith, The Rise of Skywalker, The Last Jedi, Attack of the Clones, and The Phantom Menace being last on the list. But here's the thing. That ranking could change tomorrow, next month, or even next year. My experience of Star Wars is deeply tied to my personal journey with the films and how they've grown and evolved with me. And I think that's true for all of us. So in the end, I think Star Wars is really about that first spark, the first trilogy you experience, especially if you're a kid. That's where your baseline is set, and that's where the trilogy feels like home to whoever is experiencing it at the time. For me, that's the original trilogy, and no matter how much I might appreciate the prequels over time, the originals will always stand alone as the best installment of the saga. So what about you? Are you a fan who grew up with the originals, the prequels, or maybe even the sequels? How does that shape your view of the entire Star Wars universe? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to give a like and a subscribe. Hit the notification bell, because there's a lot more content coming. Thanks for watching. And remember, the Force is in you, and you are at one